Hillary Clinton entered the venue of that CNN town hall, operating under the distinct impression that a provincial legal practitioner from the rural parishes of Louisiana would present himself as an effortless conquest for her political intellect. She had momentarily neglected the fact that gentlemen from the American South maintained detailed receipts and records within their metaphorical tackle boxes, and Senator John Kennedy had been navigating these specific political waters and studying the Clintons for 3 decades. The network had constructed the event as a definitive debate regarding the future of American leadership and the concept of integrity, having meticulously selected a diverse audience composed of one-half Democrats who would nod approvingly at Hillary's rehearsed lines regarding her fight for families, and one-half Republicans who had attended to witness if the Louisiana senator, known for his folksy destruction of political correctness, could dismantle Hillary in the same manner he had dismantled countless appointees during confirmation hearings. Hillary arrived at the event clad in her signature pantsuit, this particular one, a specific shade of blue that likely cost an amount equivalent to the value of Kennedy's entire pickup truck. She wore that practiced and rehearsed smile, the specific expression she deploys when she believes she is situated within friendly territory and among allies. CNN was theoretically supposed to be a safe harbor, with Anderson Cooper serving as the moderator and the audience having been carefully vetted and selected. She was prepared to discuss her extensive experience, her years of service, and perhaps take a few gentle and strategic swipes at Donald Trump to remind the public why she should remain relevant in the political discourse. What she did not anticipate, however, was that Senator John Kennedy does not engage in gentle tactics when the truth is at stake. He proceeded to walk onto the stage, appearing precisely as the entity he truly is, which is a 72-year-old gentleman who could easily be mistaken for someone's charming grandfather, provided that said grandfather also happened to have graduated magna cum laude from Vanderbilt University, finished first in his class at Oxford, and earned a degree from the University of Virginia School of Law. He was attired in a rumpled suit that appeared as though he had retrieved it from the deepest recesses of his closet, with his reading glasses perched precariously on the end of his nose, carrying a yellow legal pad that was covered in his distinctive handwriting. He settled into his chair with the unhurried ease of an individual who had spent his entire existence in Louisiana, a place where nobody rushes, and everybody maintains a polite demeanor right up until the moment they inform you exactly why you are incorrect in the friendliest way imaginable. He nodded toward Hillary with genuine Southern courtesy, the specific kind of politeness that silently communicates the message that I am going to dismantle your arguments, but I am going to be exceptionally nice while doing so. Anderson Cooper opened the proceedings with a question regarding public service and leadership, which was a softball inquiry designed to allow Hillary to tout her extensive resume. She launched into her standard and rehearsed spiel regarding her decades of fighting for families, her work as First Lady, her tenure as a senator, and her time as Secretary of State. Kennedy allowed her to finish her statement completely before he leaned forward with that "aw shucks" expression that frequently causes people to underestimate him right before he ruins their entire day. "Madam Secretary," he articulated in that slow and deliberate Louisiana drawl that makes every single word sound as if it is being served alongside sweet tea and cornbread, "I appreciate that sentiment. And truly I do. For public service is indeed noble work, but I am confused about something, and perhaps you can assist me in understanding it, because I am merely a simple country lawyer, and sometimes these complicated financial matters go over my head." He adjusted his glasses and consulted his legal pad before continuing, noting that she and President Clinton left the White House in 2001, and she stated that you all were dead broke, which is a direct quote, "Ma'am, dead broke." Now, according to Forbes and other entities who track these financial matters, you collectively are worth somewhere north of $120 million, which is a significant amount of money for people who have spent the majority of their lives in government service. Kennedy looked up with those friendly eyes that had suddenly become not so friendly and stated that he had been in the Senate for a while and makes a good salary of $174,000 a year, the same as she did. Yet he is still driving a 2008 Ford pickup truck with 186,000 miles on the odometer. So he was trying to figure out how government service generates $120 million for someone. And he asked if she could walk him through that mathematics, because if there is a trick to it, he would like to inform his constituents who are working 2 jobs just to pay their electricity bill. The audience laughed, and Hillary's smile froze in place like someone had paused a video mid-frame. And in that precise moment, she realized she had made a terrible mistake by agreeing to this appearance. What transpired subsequently was a masterclass in Southern fried truth-telling. For while Hillary thought she had faced tough questions before, from Republican committees and Fox News debate stages, she had never met someone who could destroy a narrative while sounding like he was merely asking for directions to the nearest grocery store. If you believe I am exaggerating, you have not witnessed what a Louisiana lawyer with an Oxford degree and a tackle box full of receipts can do to 30 years of Clinton scandals. Facts do not care about your pantsuit or your resume, and Senator Kennedy brought all the facts delivered with a smile. Anderson Cooper attempted to steer the conversation towards safer topics, but Kennedy was not allowing it. Secretary Clinton, before we move on, I need to discuss something that has been bothering me for years, and it is about Benghazi. Now I know you are tired of talking about it, and you have made that reality real clear. But see, ma'am, I am from Louisiana, and we endured Hurricane Katrina, and when people died on our government's watch, we wanted answers. We did not think those questions were inconvenient. Rather, we thought they were owed to the families. He flipped a page on his legal pad and cited September 11, 2012, when 4 Americans died in Benghazi: Libya Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty. You were the Secretary of State in charge of their security and in charge of the response. And now, here is what I cannot square. Kennedy pulled out printed emails, and he had actually printed them out in old-school style. At 1:112 p.m. that night, about 2 hours after the attack started, you sent an email to your daughter, Chelsea. Though of course you did not use her real name in the email, you used Diane Reynolds, which I find curious, but that is another matter entirely. In that email, you wrote that 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an Al-Qaeda-like group. He looked up over his reading glasses and emphasized Al-Qaeda-like group, noting that is what she told her daughter that very night. Then the next morning, you had a phone call with the Egyptian Prime Minister, and the notes from that call say you told him that we know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film, that it was a planned attack and not a protest. Kennedy set down the papers and asked her to help him understand, noting that she told her daughter it was terrorism and told Egypt's prime minister it was not about a video. But then, for the next 2 weeks, you and your administration told the American people, and, more importantly, you told the families of those dead Americans that it was all about a YouTube video that nobody had ever heard of. He pulled out more documents, citing Pat Smith, the mother of Sean Smith, who says you looked her in the eye at her son's coffin and told her it was the video's fault, and told her they would arrest the filmmaker. Charles Woods, the father of Tyrone Woods, wrote in his diary what you said, which was, "We are going to have the filmmaker arrested. You blamed a filmmaker for your failures, ma'am." Hillary started to respond, but Kennedy held up a gentle hand that was polite but firm, stating that he was not done. Susan Rice, who worked for you and answered to you, went on 5 Sunday morning shows and blamed the video, and who gave her those talking points. You did, your State Department did, and we know from emails that you knew those talking points were false when you approved them. Kennedy leaned back in his chair and stated, "So here is my question, and I am asking it as simply as I know how you told your daughter the truth, and you told foreign leaders the truth, but you told grieving American families a lie. And why? Was it because it was 2 months before the 2012 election, and the Obama administration was running on the narrative that Al-Qaeda is on the run? Was it politically inconvenient to admit Al-Qaeda had killed 4 Americans on September 11th, on your watch? He looked at her with those friendly eyes that had gone very cold. Because, ma'am, where I come from, when you lie to a mother at her son's funeral, that is not a political strategy. That is just evil. And I need to know, at what point did you decide those families deserved lies instead of the truth? Hillary's voice was tight as she claimed the situation was fluid and intelligence was evolving. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted gently, your emails prove you knew the truth from the first night, and that is not evolving intelligence. That is calculated deception. You knew, and you lied to grieving families at coffins, and that is not the fog of war. And 4 Americans are still dead because you denied them security beforehand and then lied about why they died afterward. He consulted his pad again, noting that Ambassador Stevens sent multiple requests for additional security in the months before the attack, and your State Department denied them. The CIA team on the ground later testified they were told to stand down, and military assets were available but weren't deployed until it was too late. Kennedy looked up and stated, you were in charge of all of that. The security that wasn't provided, the rescue that didn't come, and the lies that followed. And when Congress asked you about it, you said, and I remember this real clear, what difference does it make? He shook his head slowly and said, ma'am, it makes all the difference in the world. It is the difference between a public servant and someone who puts politics over American lives, and you chose politics. The audience was dead silent, and Hillary opened her mouth twice and closed it both times. Anderson Cooper tried to jump in, but Kennedy just smiled that Southern smile and said, oh, we are just getting started. And folks, Kennedy was just warming up, and he was still being polite. Share this, if you remember those families. Kennedy didn't wait for the next question. He just transitioned seamlessly the way a good storyteller does. While we are discussing truth and transparency, let us talk about your email server. Now, I will be honest with you. I am not real good with computers, and I still use a flip phone, which drives my staff absolutely crazy. But even I know you are not supposed to run the State Department's business through a server in your basement. So help me understand. Did you not know that was wrong? Or did you know and just not care? He flipped through his legal pad and noted that when she became Secretary of State, she signed documents and he had copies there, acknowledging that she understood how to handle classified information. You took training and you knew the rules, but instead of using the government's secure email system, you set up a private server at your house in Chappaqua, New York. Kennedy looked up and said, now, some folks might think that is convenient, but ma'am, the only reason to do that is to avoid oversight. Government emails are subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. Government emails are archived, and government emails can be subpoenaed. But private server emails, well, those are under your control, and you decide what people see, and that is not convenience. That is concealment. He pulled out FBI reports and noted that the FBI investigated, as they had to once this became public. They found that you sent and received 110 emails containing classified information, and 8 of those chains contained top secret information, which is the highest classification level we have, and you were running it through a server in your basement that wasn't protected by government security. But here is where it gets interesting, Kennedy said, his drawl getting a little more pronounced. March 2015, the story breaks, and the House Select Committee on Benghazi issues a subpoena for all your emails, which is a legal order, ma'am, and a subpoena means you have to preserve and produce the evidence. He looked at her over his glasses and noted that 3 weeks later, Your attorney and your aide sorted through your emails and decided unilaterally, without oversight, that 33,000 of them were personal, about yoga and Chelsea's wedding, you said. Then your IT specialist takes those 33,000 emails and deletes them using software called BleachBit. Kennedy paused for effect and said, "Now, I had to look up what BleachBit does, and it is software specifically designed to permanently erase data so it cannot be recovered. It doesn't just delete files, it overwrites them multiple times with random data. And that is not cleaning out your inbox, ma'am. That is destroying evidence, and you did it after receiving a congressional subpoena." He held up another document, stating, "The FBI also found that you and your staff destroyed 13 mobile devices that had been used to access the server. How did you destroy them?" According to the FBI report, some were broken with hammers. "Hammers, ma'am, like you were trying to kill them." Kennedy sat back and said, "Now let me tell you what would happen if I did that. If I set up a private server to avoid oversight, conducted government business on it, got subpoenaed, deleted 33,000 documents, used special software to make them unrecoverable, and smashed my phones with hammers, I would be in federal prison. If any of my constituents did that, they would be prosecuted so fast it would make your head spin." He looked at her steadily and said, "But you," FBI Director Comey went on TV and said, "you were extremely careless," which, by the way, is functionally identical to the legal standard of gross negligence that would have made this a crime. But then he said, "No reasonable prosecutor would bring this case." That is not a legal standard, ma'am. That is a political decision. Hillary tried to defend herself, claiming the FBI conducted a thorough investigation and cleared her. "Ma'am," Kennedy said gently but firmly, "the FBI said you broke the law, but they wouldn't charge you. And that is not being cleared. That is being protected. And I think the American people can tell the difference." He gathered his papers and summarized that she set up a private server to avoid oversight, put classified information at risk, destroyed evidence when caught, and lied about it repeatedly by saying she never sent classified information, then said nothing was marked classified, then said she didn't know what classified markings meant. Every statement was proven false, but you faced no consequences because your name is Clinton. Kennedy leaned forward and said, "Ma'am, I am from Louisiana, and we have had some corrupt politicians, and Edwin Edwards went to prison, but even he never destroyed evidence with BleachBit and hammers. That is a special level of contempt for the law. And you want us to think you should have been president?" 2 rounds in, Hillary's famous composure was cracking, and Kennedy was just getting started. Kennedy shifted gears with the ease of someone who had been prosecuting cases for decades before he ever ran for office. "Now, let us discuss the Clinton Foundation. I think charity work is wonderful. I truly do. And my church back home raises money for missions and helps people in need, which is good work. But your foundation is interesting. See? It seems like everyone who donated big money to the Clinton Foundation got special access to you as Secretary of State. Now that might be coincidence. But ma'am, I am from Louisiana, and we don't believe in that many coincidences back home. That is what we call a pattern." He pulled out donor lists and meeting schedules and said, "Let us start with the big one, Uranium One." Russia wanted to acquire a Canadian company called Uranium One that controlled about 20% of America's uranium. And to do that, they needed approval from several U.S. agencies, including the State Department, your State Department. Kennedy held up financial records showing that while this deal was being reviewed, Russian interests connected to Uranium One donated $145 million to the Clinton Foundation. Let me say that again, $145 million from Russians while you were deciding whether to approve their uranium deal. He showed the timeline where the chairman of Uranium One donated millions through his family foundation, and other investors donated millions more. Then there is your husband. In June 2010, While this deal was pending, Bill Clinton was paid $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow. Who paid him Renaissance capital? A Russian bank with Kremlin ties that was promoting Uranium One stock. Kennedy looked up and noted. Then, your State Department approved the deal. Russia got control of 20% of American uranium. The Clinton Foundation got $145 million. Bill got $500,000 for a speech, and you want us to believe that is all just coincidence. He pulled out more records and said, but that is not unique. It is a pattern. Here is a study that found that of the 154 private individuals who met with you as Secretary of State, 85 were Clinton Foundation donors. That is 55% of your private meetings going to people who had paid your family foundation. Donors contributed a combined $156 million, and they got meetings. And that is not access based on policy importance, ma'am. That is pay to play. Algeria, Kennedy continued, was under restrictions for human rights violations. Then, they donated $500,000 to your foundation during a time when foreign government donations were supposed to be prohibited. And, shortly after, State Department policy toward Algeria improved. Coincidence? He showed more examples. Swedish telecom company Ericsson was facing pressure from your State Department to stop doing business with Iran. Then they paid Bill $750,000 for a speech and donated to the foundation. And the pressure on Ericsson eased. Coincidence? Kennedy pulled out Haiti files. Then there is Haiti. The 2010 earthquake was a devastating tragedy, and your foundation raised over $30 million for Haiti relief. You were Secretary of State? Bill was UN Special Envoy to Haiti, and the Clintons controlled the response. So, where did that $30 million go? He showed investigative reports stating Haitian activists have been protesting for years, saying most of the money went to Clinton cronies, contractors, and companies connected to Clinton donors for luxury hotel projects for tourists, not homes for Haitians. The Haitian people saw almost none of the money raised in their name. And there are literally protests in Haiti with signs saying, "Where did the money go?" Kennedy leaned back and looked at her, saying, "But here is the smoking gun. Ma'am, after. You lost the 2016 election. Clinton Foundation donations dropped 90%. In 2016, when you had power and might become president, the foundation raised much more. But in 2017, after you lost, it dropped significantly, and by 2020, it was down even further." He let that sink in and asked, why would donations drop 90% if it is a charity for doing good work? I will tell you why. Because people weren't donating to charity. They were buying access to power. When you had power, money poured in. When you lost power, it dried up. That is not philanthropy, ma'am. That is what the FBI calls a criminal enterprise. Hillary's face was red, as she claimed the foundation has helped millions of people around the world. "Ma'am," Kennedy said with that gentle firmness, "the foundation helped you and your husband get rich while you had power. And when you lost power, the money stopped. That is not because you suddenly stopped helping people. That is because you had nothing left to sell. You monetized the State Department through your foundation. You sold access. You sold influence. You sold American uranium to Russia, and you called it charity. Even in Louisiana, we would call that corrupt. And we have had some pretty colorful characters in Louisiana politics. 3 rounds, the Southern gentleman was destroying with a smile. Keep watching." Kennedy's expression shifted. This wasn't folksy anymore. This was serious. "Secretary Clinton, I need to show you something. It is from 2011, after Muammar Gaddafi was killed in Libya, and CBS News interviewed you. Let me play the clip." The screen showed Hillary arriving for the interview, and when told about Gaddafi's death, she laughed and said, "We came, we saw, he died," then laughed again, clearly delighted with her Caesar reference. Kennedy stopped the video and the room was silent. Ma'am, you laughed about a man being killed? Now, Gaddafi was a bad man, a dictator, a terrorist, no question. But you laughed. And then, well, let's discuss what happened after you got your way in Libya. He pulled out the policy documents, noting she was the strongest advocate in the Obama administration for military intervention in Libya. Obama was hesitant. Defense Secretary Gates opposed it. But you pushed hard because you wanted regime change. You wanted this as your foreign policy legacy, and you saw it as proof that smart power works. Kennedy showed the timeline. March 2011, NATO starts bombing. October 2011, Gaddafi is captured and killed, and you are on TV laughing about it. Then, what happened to Libya? He pulled out reports showing Libya collapsed into chaos with multiple competing governments and civil war. By 2014, ISIS controlled significant territory, including the city of Sirte, and by 2015, Libya became the main launching point for refugees trying to reach Europe, with hundreds of thousands fleeing the disaster you created. Weapons, Kennedy continued. Gaddafi had stockpiles of weapons, including thousands of surface-to-air missiles, and they disappeared, spread across North Africa and the Middle East. They ended up in Syria, fueling that civil war. They ended up with terrorist groups, and your intervention didn't just destroy Libya, it destabilized an entire region. He held up humanitarian reports, stating by 2017 the UN documented open-air slave markets in Libya. Slave markets, ma'am. Black African migrants being bought and sold like cattle in a country you liberated. That is your legacy in Libya. Kennedy's voice got quieter, which somehow made it more powerful. And then you sent Ambassador Chris Stevens into this chaos. You sent him to Benghazi, one of the most dangerous cities in your failed state. He asked for more security, and you denied it. And on September 11th, Liang Chenling Ishar, he was killed in an attack that you later lied about. He looked at her steadily and asked, "So, let me ask you, ma'am, when did the laughing stop? You laughed when Gaddafi died? Did you laugh when Libya became a failed state? When ISIS took over? When slave markets opened? When your ambassador was killed? At what point did you realize that maybe, just maybe, destroying a country without a plan for what comes next was a bad idea?" Hillary tried to respond that Libya was facing a humanitarian crisis under Gaddafi. "Ma'am," Kennedy said, his southern courtesy wearing thin, "Libya under Gaddafi was stable, not free, not democratic, but stable, and they had the highest standard of living in Africa. Now they have slave markets and civil war, and the humanitarian situation is objectively worse. You didn't save Libya. You destroyed it, and hundreds of thousands of people died because you wanted a foreign policy victory to put on your resume." He gathered his papers and said, "You had no plan for post-Gaddafi Libya. You just wanted regime change as a trophy. And when it all went to hell, you walked away. That is not leadership, ma'am. That is reckless arrogance, and a lot of people, including Americans, paid the price for your hubris." 4 rounds, Hillary's experience looking more like disasters. More coming. Kennedy took a sip of water and adjusted his glasses. "Ma'am, you talk a lot about defending democracy, about how important it is, about threats to democratic norms. So, let's discuss how you treated democracy in your own party's 2016 primary. Because, from what I can tell, you didn't so much win that nomination as purchase it." He pulled out printed emails stating July 2016, WikiLeaks published about 20,000 internal Democratic National Committee emails. Now, I know you don't like WikiLeaks, and I understand that, but those emails showed something interesting. The DNC, which is supposed to be neutral in primaries, was actively working to help you and hurt Bernie Sanders. Kennedy read from the emails about the DNC communications director discussing how to plant negative stories about Bernie and the DNC CFO, suggesting they attack Bernie's religion in southern states, using the fact he is Jewish against him. That is the Democratic National Committee planning anti-Semitic attacks to help you. He showed more evidence, citing Donna Brazile, who was working for CNN and vice chair of the DNC. She sent you debate questions in advance. Before a CNN town hall, she emailed your campaign the exact wording of a question about the death penalty. And before another debate, she sent a question about Flint's water crisis. You got the questions early. Bernie didn't. When this was exposed, Kennedy continued, CNN fired Brazile. She initially denied it, called it false. Then, in 2017, she wrote a book. In that book, she admitted something remarkable. She said she investigated whether your campaign had rigged the nomination, and she found proof. He read from the book regarding the agreement signed by the DNC and your campaign, specifying that in exchange for raising money for the DNC, Hillary would control the party's finances, strategy, and all the money raised. Her campaign had the right of refusal of who would be communications director and would make final decisions on all other staff. This was signed in August 2015. Ma'am, before the first debate, before the first vote, you bought control of the DNC a year before the primary started. Kennedy looked at her and said, "That is not a primary. That is a coronation." Bernie Sanders never had a fair shot because you had already purchased the refs. And when DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz was forced to resign over this scandal, Kennedy said, "You know what you did. You hired her that same day. She resigned in disgrace for helping you cheat, and you gave her a job. That is not distancing yourself from corruption, ma'am. That is rewarding it." He leaned forward and asked, "So explain to me, how do you rig your own party's primary, get caught doing it, and then lecture America about defending democracy? That seems like what we call, in Louisiana, having some nerve." Hillary tried to defend herself, saying she won the primary by millions of votes. After getting debate questions in advance, Kennedy interrupted, "After the DNC put their thumb on the scale for you, after you bought financial control of the party, after your people attacked Bernie's religion, ma'am, that is not winning. That is cheating. And you know what happened. Bernie supporters were so angry that many stayed home in November. Some voted third party. Some even voted for Trump. You suppressed your own party's turnout by being too greedy to let democracy work." He shook his head and said you couldn't even win a fair primary in your own party. You had to rig it, and now you want us to trust you with democracy, ma'am? That is asking a lot. 5 rounds. Hillary's democratic principles in tatters. 3 more to go. Kennedy paused. This was delicate territory, but he wasn't going to avoid it. "Secretary Clinton, you have positioned yourself as a champion of women's rights. Women's rights are human rights, you famously said in Beijing. Beautiful sentiment. So, I need to ask about something that has bothered me for years. How did you treat the women who accused your husband of sexual misconduct?" He pulled out the list: Paula Jones, Jennifer Flowers, Kathleen Willey, Juanita Broderick, Monica Lewinsky. Multiple women accused your husband of sexual harassment, assault, even rape. How did you respond? Kennedy read from news reports that you called them part of a vast right-wing conspiracy. Your advisor James Carville said about Paula Jones, "Drag a $100 bill through a trailer park, you never know what you'll find." That was your team's strategy. Trash the accusers. Imply they were trailer trash, gold diggers, liars. He looked at her and mentioned Juanita Broderick claimed Bill raped her in 1978. She stayed quiet for years, out of fear. When she finally told her story, you allegedly approached her at a campaign event and said, "I want you to know that we appreciate everything you do for Bill." She interpreted that as a threat, a message to keep quiet. "Did you intimidate a rape victim, Ma'am Monica Lewinsky?" Kennedy continued. "She was 22 years old, an intern. Your husband was President of the United States. That is a massive power imbalance. But when the scandal broke, you didn't believe the young woman. You went on TV and talked about a vast right-wing conspiracy. You blamed everyone except the man who had abused his position. He showed clips of Hillary defending Bill, attacking his accusers, claiming political persecution. You spent years destroying these women to protect your political partnership with Bill. Then, decades later, during the Me Too movement, you positioned yourself as an ally. You said, "We should believe women." Kennedy looked at her steadily. Which women? Secretary Clinton? All women, except the ones who accused your husband? That is not feminism. That is selective morality. You believe women when it is politically convenient, and you destroy them when they threaten your power. He leaned back and said, "Here is what everyone knows, but nobody says you stayed with Bill, not out of love. Nobody believes that. You stayed because you needed his political network. He was governor, then president, that gave you the platform First Lady, then senator because of sympathy over the Lewinsky scandal, then Secretary of State, then presidential candidate. You rode his coattails despite his behavior because your ambition was more important than your principles. You enabled a sexual predator," Kennedy said quietly. "When women accused him, you attacked them. When he was caught, you blamed conspiracies. Then years later, you wrapped yourself in Me Too and claimed to champion women. Ma'am, that is not just hypocrisy. That is betraying every woman who has ever been victimized just to protect your ticket to power." Hillary's voice was cold as she said, "Her marriage is not. Your marriage is a political arrangement," Kennedy said. "Everyone knows it. You stayed because leaving would have ended your career. You needed him more than you needed dignity, and you were willing to destroy other women to keep the arrangement. That is not standing by your man, ma'am. That is sacrificing other women for your ambition." 6 rounds, Hillary's feminist credentials demolished. 2 more rounds. Kennedy pulled out a worn paperback book, Hillary's What Happened. He set it on the table between them. "Ma'am, you wrote a whole book about why you lost the 2016 election. I read it. Took me a while. It is 500 pages of blaming everyone except the person responsible. So let me save folks some time and give you the short version. You lost because voters didn't want you. That is it. That is the whole story." He opened the book to marked pages stating, "In here you blame James Comey. You blame Russia. You blame WikiLeaks. You blame Bernie Sanders. You blame Jill Stein. You blame sexism. You blame the media. You blame voter suppression. You blame everyone except Hillary Clinton. But let us talk about why you actually lost." Kennedy pulled out campaign data. "You called half of Trump supporters deplorables. You actually said that. Basket of deplorables. You insulted tens of millions of Americans for considering voting for your opponent. That is not campaigning, ma'am. That is contempt. And voters noticed." He showed a map. "Wisconsin? You didn't visit it once during the general election. Not once. That is a state that had voted Democrat for decades. Your campaign told you to go there. The data showed it was slipping. You ignored them. You thought it was in the bag. Maybe if you had bothered to show up, you could have found 23,000 votes." "Michigan and Pennsylvania," Kennedy continued. "Same story. You took working-class voters for granted. You figured they would vote Democrat, like always. But they didn't. They voted for Trump. Why? Because he showed up. He talked to them. You talked down to them. He pulled out her Wall Street speeches. You gave speeches to Goldman Sachs and other banks for $225,000 each. You made millions talking to the people who caused the 2008 financial crisis. Then your transcripts leaked, and voters read that you told bankers you have public positions and private positions. You admitted to bankers that you lie to voters, that you say one thing publicly and another thing privately." Kennedy looked at her. "Ma'am, that is not sophisticated politics. That is admitting you are dishonest, and voters don't like dishonest." He showed her favorability ratings. "You entered 2016 with the highest unfavorability ratings of any Democratic nominee in modern history. Decades of scandals, we have covered most of them tonight, had destroyed your credibility. Most Americans simply didn't trust you. Not because of sexism, because of your record. And you know what? Kennedy said. You still might have won despite all of that, but you ran a terrible campaign. You couldn't articulate why you wanted to be president. Everything was about it being your turn. You had paid your dues. You had waited. You deserved it. But, ma'am, the presidency isn't about what you deserve. It is about what Americans need. He leaned forward. You came across as entitled, inauthentic, and out of touch. You tried to connect with young people by talking about Pokemon Go. You told people to Pokemon Go to the polls. That is not connecting, ma'am. That is pandering. And bad pandering at that. So you lost, Kennedy said. You lost to a reality TV star with no political experience, and instead of looking in the mirror and asking what you did wrong, you wrote a 500-page book blaming everyone else. That is not reflection, ma'am. That is deflection. He picked up her book. The title is What Happened. I can tell you what happened in one sentence. Voters rejected 30 years of Clinton corruption, entitlement, and dishonesty. That is what happened. And you still can't admit it. 7 rounds, 1 more. The Louisiana finale. Kennedy set down his legal pad. For the first time all night, he didn't consult his notes. He had been waiting for this moment for 30 years. Secretary Clinton, you have been in public life since 1992. That is 32 years. So, I have been thinking, what is your legacy? What will history remember about Hillary Clinton? So I made a list. It is long. Bear with me. He started counting on his fingers. Whitewater, Travelgate, the Rose law firm billing records that mysteriously appeared in the White House residence after being subpoenaed, the cattle futures trading, where you somehow turned $1,000 into $100,000 with no experience. FBI files on political opponents found in the White House, Vince Foster's death and all the questions around it, the missing emails from the Arkansas governor's mansion. Then, as First Lady, Kennedy continued, your health care reform effort that failed so spectacularly that Democrats lost Congress for the first time in 40 years, your husband's impeachment that you defended by attacking his victims, your carpetbagger Senate run in New York, a state you had never lived in. As senator, he went on, your vote for the Iraq War that you later regretted when it became politically inconvenient, on your presidential campaign in 2008, where you ran racist ads against Obama, questioned whether he was really a Muslim, and still lost. As Secretary of State, Kennedy's voice got harder. Benghazi, 4 dead Americans' lies to their families. The email server in your basement, 33,000 deleted emails. The Clinton Foundation pay-to-play schemes, Uranium One. Libya destroyed into chaos with slave markets. The Russian reset that made things worse. The Syria red line that Obama drew, and you supported that, made America look weak when we didn't enforce it. Then 2016, Kennedy continued, rigging the primary against Bernie, getting debate questions in advance, losing to Trump despite every advantage, writing a book blaming everyone but yourself, spending 4 years claiming the election was stolen by Russia, undermining the very democracy you claim to defend. He looked at her steadily. That is your legacy, ma'am. 32 years of scandal, corruption, lying, enabling predators, getting Americans killed, destroying evidence, selling influence, and never not once taking responsibility for any of it. Kennedy's voice got quiet. You know what the pattern is. Rules don't apply to Clintons. You set up a private server, no consequences. You destroy subpoenaed evidence, no consequences. You take foreign money while making policy, no consequences. You rig a primary, no consequences. You lie to Congress, no consequences. You lie to the FBI, no consequences. You lie to families of dead Americans, no consequences. Until November 8, 2016. He said, that is when you finally faced accountability. Not from prosecutors or Congress or the media who protected you. From voters Regular Americans who looked at 30 years of Clinton corruption and said, "No thanks." That was the only real accountability you have ever faced, and you still can't accept it. Kennedy stood up, all 6'1" of him, unfolding from his chair. "Ma'am, I am going to be real honest with you now, if you don't mind. Where I come from in Louisiana, we believe in a few simple things. Tell the truth. Keep your word. Take responsibility for your mistakes. Treat people with respect. You have spent 32 years doing the opposite of all of that. You lie. Then you lie about lying. You make promises, then break them when convenient. You never admit mistakes. You blame others, and you treat people with contempt, especially the people who work for you, the people who trusted you, and the people you were supposed to serve." His voice got softer but more intense. "You have proven one thing, though. You have proven that if you are rich enough, powerful enough, connected enough, and shameless enough, you can get away with almost anything in this country. Almost, because there is one thing: you can't escape the voters. And when they finally got their say, they rejected you soundly, completely, decisively. That wasn't Russia, ma'am. That wasn't Comey. That wasn't sexism. That was Americans who had watched you for 30 years and decided that they had seen enough. That was democracy. Real democracy. The kind you claimed to defend but actually tried to rig. And democracy said no." Kennedy picked up his legal pad. "You came here tonight thinking you would remind people why you should still be relevant. Instead, you have reminded them why they were right to reject you. Your legacy isn't breaking glass ceilings, ma'am. Your legacy is proving that corruption, even when protected by power and wealth, can still be recognized and rejected by regular Americans who just want leaders who tell the truth and follow the law." He looked at her one last time. "I am just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana. But even I can see that 32 years of scandal isn't bad luck. It is character. And your character has been on display for 3 decades. America has seen enough." The audience erupted, half in thunderous applause, half in stunned silence, all of them having witnessed something rare. A complete dismantling of a political legacy by someone who sounded like he was just explaining why the fish weren't biting. Hillary sat frozen, her famous pantsuit suddenly looking less like armor and more like the emperor's new clothes. She had come to remind America of her experience. She was leaving as a reminder of why experience without integrity is just experienced corruption. Senator John Kennedy closed his legal pad, adjusted his glasses, and walked off stage with that unhurried Louisiana stride, looking like someone who just finished a pleasant conversation about the weather, instead of having systematically destroyed 32 years of political mythology. The video went viral at a speed that made social media platforms crash. Within 4 hours, it had 180 million views. Within 12 hours, it was the most watched political content in internet history. Within 24 hours, even CNN, which had hosted the debate, was playing clips with chyrons like "Clinton struggles with tough questions." But it wasn't the views that mattered. It was the comments, thousands upon thousands from Democrats, saying things like, "I voted for her, but Kennedy is right. And why didn't anyone ask these questions before? And I feel betrayed." The Louisiana lesson became the name everyone used. Not because Kennedy had lectured, he hadn't, but because he taught America something it should have known all along, that Southern manners and devastating truth-telling aren't opposites. Sometimes the nicest thing you can do for someone is tell them the truth they have been avoiding. Hillary's remaining political capital evaporated overnight. The speeches she had been giving for $250,000 canceled. The book tour she had planned ended early. The podcast she had started quietly discontinued. The political commentary gigs networks suddenly discovered they had enough contributors, but the real damage was to her legacy. For 30 years, she had crafted an image. First female major party nominee, former Secretary of State, champion of women, experienced leader, Kennedy had dismantled all of it, using nothing but her own record. And that Louisiana drawl that made devastating facts sound like friendly advice. The Clinton Foundation, already declining, announced it would wind down operations within 6 months. Donations had dropped 95% after the debate. Nobody wanted to be associated with what Kennedy had called pay-to-play with better PR. Democratic Party leaders found themselves in an awkward position. They had defended Hillary for years, covered for her scandals, blamed her critics. Now, even their own voters were asking, "Why didn't you tell us?" The progressive wing of the party used the moment to purge Clintonism from Democratic politics. The Clinton way became synonymous with corruption. Senator Kennedy's stature grew, but in a uniquely Louisiana way. He didn't brag. He didn't gloat. When asked about the debate weeks later, he just said, "I asked some questions that needed asking." If folks found that uncomfortable, well, sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but it is still the truth. His folksy demeanor became a political force. Other Republicans started trying to copy it, and failing because you can't fake authenticity. Kennedy's ability to destroy someone while sounding like your friendly uncle giving advice became legendary. Kennedy Ed entered the political lexicon, meaning destroyed politely with facts. 6 months later, CNN did a retrospective on the debate. Their own polling showed it had shifted public opinion on Hillary more than any other single event in her career. Not because Kennedy had been mean, he had been unfailingly polite, but because he had been thorough, factual, and devastating. The Harvard Kennedy School, no relation, used the debate in its political communication classes as an example of effective rhetoric. Notice, professors would say, he never raises his voice. He never insults her personally. He just presents her own record and lets it speak for itself. That is more powerful than any attack. A year later, someone asked Kennedy if he had any regrets about how tough he had been on Hillary. He thought for a moment, then said in that drawl, "Well, I wasn't trying to be tough. I was trying to be honest. And if being honest about someone's record seems tough, maybe the problem isn't the honesty. Maybe the problem is the record." That quote got 50 million views. Hillary Clinton largely disappeared from public life. Occasional opinion pieces in friendly outlets. Rare interviews where she would discuss anything except her record. A quiet retirement in Chappaqua, surrounded by the wealth she had accumulated through 3 decades of public service. The woman who had wanted to be remembered as a trailblazer was instead remembered as a cautionary tale. Not about gender. Plenty of women in politics were thriving. About corruption, entitlement, and the dangers of protecting politicians from accountability because of their power or connections. Senator Kennedy went back to Louisiana, back to driving his pickup truck, back to speaking in that drawl that made complicated things sound simple, and simple truths sound profound. He had done what needed doing, held power accountable with nothing but facts and Southern courtesy. Senator John Kennedy proved something remarkable that night. You don't need to yell to be heard. You don't need to insult to be effective. You just need facts, preparation, and the courage to present them clearly even when they are uncomfortable, even when they are about powerful people, even when the consequences might be severe. Hillary Clinton represented everything Americans distrust about Washington. Corruption protected by power. Rules that don't apply equally. Scandals that never result in consequences. Lies that are never called lies. 32 years of operating above the law while claiming to serve the public. Kennedy didn't destroy her with attacks or conspiracies. He destroyed her with her own record delivered in a Louisiana drawl that made it sound like he was just explaining basic facts to someone who should already know them. Share this with everyone who believes in accountability, regardless of power. Comment below, should there be a statute of limitations on Clinton scandals, or does corruption remain corruption no matter how much time passes? Because Senator Kennedy proved that night what many had suspected for years. The facts about Hillary Clinton were worse than the conspiracies. The documented record was more damning than any theory. And sometimes, all you need to expose corruption is a country lawyer with a legal pad and a drawl. Facts don't care about your pantsuit, your resume, or your political power. They just are. And when someone has the courtesy to present them clearly, even the most powerful people discover that truth is the ultimate accountability. The Louisiana lesson wasn't about politics, it was about character. And in that CNN studio, America learned that character or lack thereof eventually catches up to everyone, even Clinton's, especially Clinton's. Kennedy didn't destroy her with attacks or conspiracies. He destroyed her with her own record delivered in a Louisiana drawl that made it sound like he was just explaining basic facts to someone who should already know them. Share this with everyone who believes in accountability, regardless of power. Comment below, should there be a statute of limitations on Clinton scandals, or does corruption remain corruption no matter how much time passes? Because Senator Kennedy proved that night what many had suspected for years. The facts about Hillary Clinton were worse than the conspiracies. The documented record was more damning than any theory. And sometimes, all you need to expose corruption is a country lawyer with a legal pad and a drawl. Facts don't care about your pantsuit, your resume, or your political power. They just are. And when someone has the courtesy to present them clearly, even the most powerful people discover that truth is the ultimate accountability. The Louisiana lesson wasn't about politics, it was about character. And in that CNN studio, America learned that character or lack thereof eventually catches up to everyone, even Clinton's, especially Clinton's. Kennedy didn't destroy her with attacks or conspiracies. He destroyed her with her own record delivered in a Louisiana drawl that made it sound like he was just explaining basic facts to someone who should already know them. Share this with everyone who believes in accountability, regardless of power. Comment below, should there be a statute of limitations on Clinton scandals, or does corruption remain corruption no matter how much time passes? Because Senator Kennedy proved that night what many had suspected for years. The facts about Hillary Clinton were worse than the conspiracies. The documented record was more damning than any theory. And sometimes, all you need to expose corruption is a country lawyer with a legal pad and a drawl. Facts don't care about your pantsuit, your resume, or your political power. They just are. And when someone has the courtesy to present them clearly, even the most powerful people discover that truth is the ultimate accountability. The Louisiana lesson wasn't about politics. It was about character. And in that CNN studio, America learned that character or lack thereof eventually catches up to everyone, even Clinton's, especially Clinton's.